All right, we are live on YouTube and we can start.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Happy Wednesday, and welcome to our Voter Assistance Advisory Committee, or VAAC, meeting tonight. My name is Amanda Malillo. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Affairs here at the Campaign Finance Board. This evening, I'm filling in for Eric Friedman. He usually plays the MC role. It's really fantastic to be here with you all. I just have a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. First of all, this meeting is being live streamed on our YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/NYCCFB. Second of all, this meeting has captioning services, ASL interpretation, and Spanish interpretation available for you all. Just reach out to the host if you need any assistance in accessing these services. To ensure that we are being inclusive in these meetings, we're going to ask all of our participants this evening to give a brief self-description of who they are, including their pronouns or what they're wearing as they introduce themselves. For example, my name is Amanda Malillo. I am a white woman in my late 30s. I am sitting in my kitchen right now, my kitchen table. I have long dark blonde hair and I'm wearing a black cardigan. I use she, her pronouns. As I mentioned before, I'm the Deputy Director of Public Affairs at the Campaign Finance Board. So we'll just ask that everyone introduce themselves that way for any audience members we may have who are blind or low vision. Finally, we have a packed schedule for today's meeting. This includes welcoming remarks from our new Executive Director, Paul Ryan, who we're thrilled to introduce this evening, and our very fascinating panel on misinformation ahead of the 2024 presidential elections. I would like to turn the floor over to our VAAC members for their introductions right now. Chris, if you'd like to jump in, or Danielle, I open the floor to you both.
Sure, I will go first. Good evening, everybody. I am Christopher Malone. Please feel free to call me Chris. I go by the pronouns he, him. I am a man of European descent, middle-aged, graying hair, black glasses, wearing all burgundy, I think. I'm kind of colorblind, but a form of red tie, reddish shirt, red sweater. Burgundy jacket. I am the Associate Provost at Farmingdale State College. I'm also a political scientist by training, and I was appointed to VAAC by Mayor Bill de Blasio in April of 2020, right amongst the pandemic. So I call myself a pandemic appointee. And I've been now here almost 4 years. This has been an exhilarating experience for me personally. More importantly, I think, though, what we're trying to accomplish with this committee and the material we'll cover, especially tonight, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, really an important subject. And the fact that we have such an esteemed panel of guests who will talk about this, from elected officials to experts in the field, really is a testament to the good work that the CFB is doing. And I lastly want to welcome our new Executive Director, Paul Ryan. So thank you all for having me, and it's good to be here.
Yeah, ditto on everything Chris said. I'm Danielle Girard. I'm a senior staff attorney at Children's Rights. I'm the controller's appointment. I'm wearing a cable knit sweater, a beige cable knit sweater. I have blonde hair that isn't going to stay that way for too much longer. And I am the controller's appointment to the VAAC, thrilled to serve. And I just want to say, again, ditto on everything Chris said. And I want to add that voting is so important, and the work that the VAAC staff does to make that possible and to spread the word and to get people out and excited, and the publications and everything else are first rate. And I only wish that the rest of the country had people like we have on the VAAC. I guess Paul's next, maybe.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll jump into this panel discussion. So hello, everyone. My name is Paul Seamus Ryan. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a 52-year-old white man with short brown hair. I'm wearing a black suit and a red and blue tie this evening, sitting in my Campaign Finance Board office. I'm really pleased to be here in my new and very exciting capacity as Executive Director of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. I am in week 2 of this new job for me. I've been a democracy movement lawyer and nonprofit manager for more than 20 years, dedicated to building multiracial and broadly inclusive democracy. Over the past few years, especially, I've been delving into election myths and disinformation, researching and writing on the topic, as well as the real and potential impacts of AI, artificial intelligence, on elections. Some of the topics we'll be touching on this evening. So it's fitting that as I kick off my tenure at the Campaign Finance Board, I have the opportunity to moderate this panel of experts and talk through some of the most hot button pressing issues in the world of voting, elections, and democracy. I'll briefly introduce each member of our roundtable, and then I will invite them to share a bit more about themselves if they'd like once they jump in to speak. So with us, we have Council Member Jennifer Gutierrez, who is chair of the Council's Committee on Technology, which has under its purview the dissemination of public information through the use of technology. Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine, who has been outspoken on the implications of AI on election integrity. A few months ago, his Q&A with City and State New York was provocatively titled, "New York is ignoring the AI revolution at its peril." Also joining us is Michaela Baditha-Ratney, who is a lawyer and staff expert at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU Law, where coincidentally more than 20 years ago, I spent a semester in summer as a legal extern. Near and dear to my heart is the Brennan Center. As Democracy Counsel, Michaela focuses on election reform, election security, governance, voting, truth, and information. And last but certainly not least, we have with us Josue Romualdo, who's Program Manager for Information Integrity at Naleo Educational Fund. Josue leads Defiende la Verdad, a campaign launched in September of 2022 to counter the misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, terms that are often combined with the shortened form MDM. Their efforts that target Latinos and prevents them from being civically engaged. So now let's get to our roundtable discussion. We'll spend about 50 minutes, just under an hour, with our panelists discussing this issue. Then about 10 minutes with our panelists fielding questions from our committee members before I'll invite each of our panelists to share any brief closing remarks. So kick it off with a question, and we're going to be pretty casual about this roundtable discussion, so feel free to jump in with any comments you have, any commentary you have. First question, how have mis and disinformation trends evolved from 2016 until today? Who among you wants to jump in and take first stab at this? Don't be shy. All right, Jennifer, I see you unmuted.
I was trying to hold out on having to describe myself, but hi everyone. I'm Jennifer Gutierrez. I'm a New York City Council member. I am a Latina woman in my mid-30s. I have wavy hair. I have iconic gold hoop earrings and some red lipstick on and a black top. The question was, how has misinformation evolved since 2016?
Yeah, until today. What have you seen in the last few years?
Oh, I mean, I'm gonna not go off for too long because I know that the borough president also has a ton of opinions on this, and so do our other panelists. But I feel that the misinformation has obviously gotten more pervasive and more accessible. I feel that in a time where we felt like misinformation used to live kind of on one or two platforms, it has really not discriminated on its reach. And for me in my community and the district that I represent, the availability and accessibility for which folks of all ages who speak all languages have to kind of get that misinformation and have it live in their phones, in their computers, in their minds, I think has grown exponentially. There's just a lot more platforms. It used to, you get your misinformation from Facebook, and now it lives on your messenger applications and it lives on your other social media platforms. So that to me is the most astounding.
Yeah. Mark, you've been a candidate, office holder, you're a policy expert. What have you seen? What kind of trends in the last few years?
Thank you, Paul. First of all, welcome to this new role. Really excited for your leadership, and thank you for having me here and for putting this together. I I am a white man in my mid-50s wearing black glasses and a suit, and it's he, him. I love that I'm on a panel with the most amazing city council member, Jen Gutierrez, who's just doing such a great job as chair of the technology committee. Really appreciate you, Jen, and your leadership, and excited for this dialogue tonight with all our fellow panelists. You know, unfortunately, misinformation has been a weapon in New York politics since forever. And it is often come in the form of hit pieces in the mail, sometimes delivered anonymously, without the funding source clearly labeled. And this isn't new, certainly not since 2016. But what is new is the ease and speed with which people can now synthesize images and voice and audio and increasingly video in ways that are harder and harder to distinguish from reality. So traditionally, some of the ugliest political messaging might be in the form of almost a cartoonish photoshopping. I don't know, you call somebody bought and paid for, and so you have a picture of them with money coming out of their pockets. And, you know, it can be potent and it can be unfair and it can be deceptive, but generally people aren't confused with that kind of messaging to be reflecting of an actual photograph or video. And, but today we're in a new world, and we've already had one pretty alarming incident adjacent to election politics, where the Manhattan Democratic County leader, Keith Wright, was targeted with synthetic audio. I'm quite certain it was AI generated. I know him well enough, saying something really nasty about another elected official. But I got to tell you, it was darn close to indistinguishable. And I had to listen to it several times to be sure. And because I know him, I was able to pick out faint inconsistencies. But that was a audio clip generated in January of 2024. And this is the progress of these systems is just astoundingly fast. And I worry about our next election cycle in 2025. I worry about a flood of this kind of content: audio, video, voice, images, of course. And I think we've got to figure out collectively how to manage this. And I know that's what tonight is about. I think, you know, a theme that I'll be delivering here is I think CFB needs more resources to dedicate to this. And I think we got to find you the budget for that, because this is a whole new category of work that we need you and other entities, which we'll talk about tonight, to take on.
Thanks, Mark. Michaela, can you start with a description of yourself, and then we'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic.
Sure. I am Michaela. I'm a lawyer with the Brennan Center. I am a South Asian woman, and I am wearing an orange dress with black and white leaves, and I use she, her pronouns. So, you know, following on from what was just said, a couple of trends I'd like to highlight is, you know, the broader context in which this is occurring. And there, you know, one of those pieces is an increasing spate of threats against election officials and election workers. And we've seen across the country many career election officials resigning in the wake of January 6th. So, you know, all of these problems are compounding. The loss of election officials is creating more holes to fill. It's making it harder for election offices to address election misinformation. And, you know, there are also sort of other issues like social media companies retrenching on some of their prior efforts to address these issues as well.
Thanks. Josue, please give us a description, and love to hear what you've been seeing in terms of trends.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Josue Romualdo. I am my pronouns are he, him. I'm wearing a white button up with a black jacket, suit jacket. and I am based out of Washington, D.C. I am the program manager for information integrity at Naleo Educational Fund, and I also lead our anti-disinformation campaign called Defiende la Verdad, or Defend the Truth. In this work, I've identified, I echo what some of my fellow panelists have mentioned, but one thing that has stood out for me in the work that I do is the loss of decline of trust in institutions. So when we see narratives that have amplified that mistrust, particularly in our elections, in our electoral institutions, it's a bit frightening because it does make it a bit difficult to identify or perhaps leverage trusted messengers, which I'm sure we'll talk about it later in our panel. So I don't want to give too much away. I think what was mentioned about technology advancement, I think that is something absolutely to highlight. Technology continues to evolve, and I think us nonprofit civic engagement organizations are having a hard time keeping up with all the new advancements, which I also know is another panel question. So I won't say too much, but the field continues to evolve, and us researchers, advocates, leaders are trailing behind, trying to keep up with it all.
Well, Josue, we got to you last in the introductions and last to you in the first round of questions. So let's stick with you. The next question I'd love to hear from all of you about was what has been the impact of rising mis and disinformation on communities of color and non-English speakers?
Sure. So a little bit of background. Naleo Educational Fund is a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. So we work to facilitate the political advancement and civic engagement advancement of Latinos in the U.S. So we are strictly nonpartisan, but something that we, when we work with this community, when we've talked to community members, there a few things stand out. The first is that language misinformation and disinformation in languages other than in English continue to spread, and misinfo and disinfo knows no boundaries when it comes to language barriers and even perhaps international boundaries. So what we have seen in our community is often these narratives translate from English to Spanish, and we saw a number of examples within our research of these narratives directly being translated. So these posts were written in English, and then they were translated into Spanish, and then Spanish into English, and vice versa. And we are part of other coalitions that work in this field, and they have identified other examples where misinfo and disinfo clearly exists in other languages other than in English. But staying on that topic, what we see is that in regards to social media platforms, oftentimes misinformation and disinformation examples tend to be flagged in English, I should say, tend to be flagged and removed more often. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Posts in languages other than in English tend to be flagged and removed less often than posts in Spanish and in English. Apologies. So what we see is that these narratives and these posts in Spanish continue to stay on social media platforms and in turn continue to spread, which makes it more difficult to control. The last thing that I'll say is within the Latino community, research shows that Latinos in the United States really rely on encrypted messenger applications to communicate with friends and family abroad. One specifically to mention is WhatsApp. And I think this is an example to highlight a primary example, because with these encrypted messenger applications, if we want to study the trends or we want to study the narratives that are spreading within these EMAs, we can't because of their privacy. And while these applications offer this privacy between the users, it's hard for us to really understand how are the narratives evolving, essentially. We saw examples during the 2022 midterm elections from Latin America spreading on social media platforms, claiming that election fraud was going to happen in these countries just like they were happening in the United States. So besides targeted campaigns for misinformation and disinformation towards Latinos, we have seen this field evolved in the ways that I've mentioned.
Thanks. Michaela, do you have any observations on this question, the impact of rising mis and disinfo on communities of color and non-English speakers?
Sure. I'd echo what was said about the sometimes inadequate response to misinformation in languages other than English in comparison to English. And we do see that major social media platforms often devote far fewer resources to non-English languages in the American elections context. I think election misinformation as a concept is something we're starting to see people focus on more and more, but in some ways it has been a very long-standing problem in American elections. And there have always been, occasionally bad actors who try to trick people out of voting by disseminating inaccurate or misleading information about how to vote, when to vote, and where to vote. And, even spreading misinformation about elections and voting to try to sow cynicism and distrust in the electoral process. And unfortunately, voters of color and voters who speak languages other than English are often the targets of these kinds of nefarious efforts. So this really kind of underscores the importance of devoting adequate resources to these communities, to election offices, developing partnerships with community groups from these communities, as well as the ethnic news media, and providing information in a way that is accessible and can reach the people that most need it.
Thanks. Jennifer, have you seen in your campaigning or within your constituency or more broadly targeting or differing impacts of misinfo and disinfo on communities of color and non-English speakers?
Yeah, and to echo both what Michaela and Josue said, I think there are obviously impacts to the disproportionality of how quickly some of these platforms are able to remove information, to regulate information. I will also add that representing communities of color, representing communities that are non-traditional voters, right? Folks that either become citizens and are then able to vote, or are previously incarcerated and become eligible with time. They already experience significant barriers to voting, to turning out. And so something as simple as, WhatsApp message indicating that their polling location has changed as a way to misguide and misdirect voters is enough for them to turn around and not participate. And so we've definitely seen it. Again, I think to just retouch my first response, it's, we've seen kind of the ways that people are getting this misinformation really expand. But it does impact communities, and we see it not just in digital media, but sometimes in print media. And so it is very difficult to kind of serve as the voice of, no, it's hard to check it, right? Because it happens so fast and it happens across so many platforms. And so at the local level, we definitely need a lot more regulations, disclaimers. We need to really make that distinction very clear in multiple languages across multiple platforms, and really have validators for those communities spread the right information and information about how to access correct voting or election information.
Thanks, Mark. Have you seen different impact of misinfo and disinfo on communities of color and non-English speakers, either in Manhattan election?
Well, the three panelists have spoken quite eloquently on this topic. There are separate media ecosystems for each language group, often with its own TV and print media, and certainly its own social media channels. And there is just far, far less fact-checking and journalistic oversight in non-English ecosystems. There's not enough in English either, but many of the watchdog groups and nonprofit groups who are active in monitoring political speech in English are not present in other language communities. And so it does allow misinformation to rapidly be amplified without being checked. I'll offer one note of optimism. We haven't had much of that so far in this panel, but the really astounding progress in translation that AI is presenting does now allow non-English speakers more access to mainstream sources, often in real time. And I think that could break down some barriers and could perhaps allow facts to move more quickly. But yes, in general, I'm worried about people who are subjected to rapidly transmitted misinformation in languages other than English.
Thanks. Michaela, can we jump to you? Because I know the Brennan Center, so the next question is, how should campaigns and voters and government be thinking about AI in elections? And I know the Brennan Center has been tracking legislative action in the states, and I've seen the Brennan Center all over the place on this issue. So you have any thoughts you want to share about how we should be thinking about talking about AI in elections?
Yeah, sure. So, there is this distinction between the more traditional use of AI to process and synthesize information, and then generative AI, which does that, but also produces new content. And that latter kind of AI is really the most relevant when we're talking about mis and disinformation, although the former kind can be as well. So, we've seen this boom of generative AI tools, and they do present concerns that we have seen play out in very visible ways. So from deep fake tools, these are the kind of image production or audio production tools. We seem to have seen an increase in viral moments from deep fakes that are cheaper and easier to produce and that look more sophisticated. There's also the possibility that from large language models, you might see the manufactured illusion of consensus on political or other topics from the use of these models, or the proliferation of comments that seek to misrepresent public opinion on elections process or other issues. And then you also have the possibility of kind of interactive digital disinformation campaigns. In terms of the responses, I think we've seen the most robust and widespread responses to the issue of deepfakes, both at the federal and state level, including in New York. Several states have already passed deepfake laws that look slightly different. They address the contours of the laws are slightly different, but they're all trying to basically address this issue of AI generated media being used in the election context to deceive voters. And several bills have been introduced in Congress as well. Many of them are bipartisan efforts. And and this is an issue that lawmakers in New York are interested in as well. One area that I've seen less focus on is the use of the large language models to produce potential mis and disinformation. So that's an area where I think there potentially ought to be a greater focus.
And Mark, as I mentioned during the intros, you've been really outspoken on this issue. I have a feeling you have some thoughts to share, maybe about New York and more broadly than that, but what's going on in the state of New York. And did the title of that Q&A reflect your views? They don't always, in my experience, but do you think New York is ignoring
yes,
AI?
Absolutely. Look, I'm of the opinion that AI is about to overturn every sector of life in this city, from education to employment to healthcare, and we could do a panel on all of them, but nothing's a threat to our democracy the way undermining elections is. So I commend you all for CFB for convening this. And our laws are not moving fast enough. There clearly needs to be a law to mandate that AI generated content in a political context be labeled as such. There needs to be a law that requires AI chatbots communicating with the public to identify themselves as such. It's very easy to envision deployment of AI technology to chat with individual voters, and you think you're talking to a volunteer or a campaign staffer, all sorts of opportunities for fraud and deception there. At a minimum, it should be very clear that it's an AI, not a human being. You know, there are going to be challenges here because, you know, AI tools are seeping their way into pretty much all content production. You know, I did a video a couple weeks ago, and there was a very loud ambulance in the background, and we used an AI tool to make the ambulance sirens softer. So is that now a deep fake or synthetic content? You know, I don't know. I can give you 100 examples like that are on the margin. I guess this is why we have courts. And anyway, a well-crafted law can probably filter that out. But right now, it's just open season. You know, whoever did that audio fake of Keith Wright, as far as I know, didn't break any law. I mean, it was immoral, but I don't think they actually broke any current law. And you know, I think there's a question for you and for us who thinking about New York City campaign finance system about whether if you're taking matching funds, that adds an even greater responsibility to be transparent. And I would hope it does. But I say that recognizing full well that, you know, a system to manage that is not so easy. And, you know, I opened by talking about being sympathetic for your need for budget and resources to take on these kinds of challenges. But, you know, there's a lot of things that disqualify you for getting matching funds in New York City. All sorts of fraud, certainly in your accounting. And I would argue that if you're engaging in fraudulent use of AI to spread deep fakes that harm other candidates, that you should lose your right to matching funds. Maybe we can talk more about how that would look tonight. But at any rate, we've got no laws on any of this yet. So yes, the headline was right. I'm worried that we're behind and we need to catch up.
Thanks, Jennifer. How about you? How are you thinking campaigns and voters and government should be thinking about AI in elections?
Yeah, and Mark's been, like you said, super vocal, and we've had kind of multiple conversations around this. I think the really important thing, especially in communities of color, communities that are coming from, you know, migrating here from all over, is this distrust in government, distrust in elections. And so it's really, it's profoundly important that we institute regulations and guardrails for how to utilize AI. It is all around us. It's on our phones. It's all around us. And to say that all AI is bad is false. Now, what we do need to understand is how to incorporate security and safety for its users, to make sure that we're reducing biases and discrimination. We know that those are harmful, and the way that can impact an election and an outreach can be harmful as well. And we also need to really emphasize the value of transparency and how voters and New Yorkers respond to that. One of my bills that I'm looking to reintroduce is an Office of Analytics and Integrity at the council, to really work with agencies around, like, what does this all mean, and what is the best way to ensure that as New Yorkers are interfacing with the city, that they know full and well what's in front of them, and that it's reliable, that the information that they're getting is reliable, and that we're really coming from a place of wanting to have New Yorkers trust government, trust democracy, trust election, and trust technology.
Thanks. Josue, what's going on? Naleo, what are your perspectives, Naleo's perspectives on, are there any things that aren't being said in the public conversation around AI that we're missing out on, or any things that Naleo would like to see amplified in that conversation? How do we need to be thinking about AI?
Yeah, definitely. I echo a lot of what my panelists have already said. I think one important thing is the labeling of any I'm sorry, any artificial intelligence content produced, any generated AI content produced on social media. So I know some social media platforms have already implemented some policies where any content that's been created using AI tools is labeled as such, and that will, ultimately give social media users a notification or a notice that this is AI generated. I think I alluded to this before at the beginning, but the AI technology continues to evolve. I think the most recent tool that was released, I think it's called Sora or Soaring, which takes written text and it creates a video, and these videos really look like, in real life video, not, AI generated. So I think as civic engagement organizations, we're having a hard time keeping up. But we also have some sort of, I don't want to say that a fear has been instilled, but we are continuing to learn of the potential risks that AI tools can implement in the coming elections. We've already seen some examples as mentioned before. So what we're thinking of is, well, how do we use, or how do we take the information that we have and then transform that so that all voters can access the ballot? Again, no matter what political, where they lie on the political spectrum. But I think we're more focused on, can we understand it? Can we inoculate the communities with enough knowledge for them to not be impacted or dissuaded by AI technologies? One thing that I've heard is can we use AI technologies to disseminate accurate and timely information regarding elections or the voting procedure? Can we use that same tool that's being used by different people to impact voters' participation in elections? Can we use that to counter or inoculate? I think from the community standpoint, I'm a bit concerned about how these tools will be used and how they'll be impacting the community, and the aftermath with that. But we're still in the learning phase, I should say, in the learning, studying phase, and observing how these things evolve.
Thanks, Mark. Aside from, or in addition to the Campaign Finance Board, where else can voters find trustworthy election info? And one other thing I would love to hear thoughts from you and our other panelists on, if you can work it into your comments, is, Josue, you've mentioned social media platform policies that promote transparency. My concern with social media platform and any private company policies is enforcement. And it's difficult sometimes to get these companies to enforce the policies that they announce. So any thoughts you have on the sufficiency of social media platform corporate policy versus legislating on this topic?
Well, I think it's fair to say that current corporate platform policy is wholly insufficient, and I'm pretty despairing right now in a world where Twitter has become X and it's just become overrun by trolls and spammers and bots. I don't consider it a place for healthy discourse anymore, nor a place for accurate information. But I'm not sure I know what the alternatives are. Meta has announced it's aggressively prioritizing political content and political accounts. And I guess I get that they're doing that in response to all the horror stories of previous election cycles, but one does ask where you can go then on a social network for non-toxic political content. There is, I think, a technological possibility here that watermarking put in place by the companies that are allowing for the creation of the content can really help to educate the public. And I will applaud the major platforms in the last week or two who have started labeling synthetic content as such. And to Josue's point, they're using AI, I believe, in part to do that. There's probably some human oversight as well. So no doubt we need more from from both the companies that are allowing people to create this content and the companies that are allowing them to distribute it on their platforms. But we need more from government too. I don't think we've talked a lot about the Board of Elections tonight yet, but the voter guide. Well, I guess CFB does the voter guide, correct? I should know this.
Correct.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I'm not. Let me not give the Board of Elections credit for that. I think we need to ask what role they can play in adjudicating any of this. I'm not sure I know the answer, but I would like to engage them in this conversation as well. I think we need both city, state, and federal government, as well as the corporate sector. By the way, there are some good bills in Congress as well, at the federal level, none of which are yet moving, but I am optimistic that more people are paying attention.
Jennifer, what do you think? Where can voters find trustworthy election info?
I think it's really necessary as doing like local work and community work that stakeholders and leaders continue to invest in like community organizing and the power that brings, right? And so technology is used as a tool to bring people information and resources, but not to dismiss the very real tool that is like one-on-one organizing and organizing in your neighborhood. And so something that I've, advocated to my own mother, who will utilize, a platform for information, is like, ask questions, demand more. And it's really up to us to create spaces for like these viable leaders and stakeholders to like spread a message. So not to disqualify, but we really do need qualifiers to be able to bring that message home. And so it is a matter of like more resources for the CFB, but also more resources for our communities, making sure that digital literacy is comprehensive and that we are not just addressing connectivity and access to internet, but how to utilize social media platforms and incorporating a real sense of responsibility when we're talking about digital literacy. And like Mark said, it really is a responsibility at every level of government, in my opinion. Really encouraged by, the FCC outright, banning deepfake and all this stuff for elections. I think we can do more because this industry is moving far faster than we can pass legislation for. And so electing those folks and sending those folks to government that really care about accountability and creating like better systems for these platforms and media companies to operate in a more responsible and safer way.
Thank you. Michaela, do you have anything to add about sources of trustworthy, reliable election info?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a footnote to the discussion that we were having earlier about AI, which is that, it's not necessarily an ideal situation either for voters to be highly skeptical of every sort of piece of visual media and audio that they see and hear. And, we are also worried about the phenomenon of the liar's dividend, where people can deny that content is authentic when it in fact is authentic. And so, I think some of those longstanding best practices of seeking out authoritative sources, sort of maintaining a level, engaging critical thinking skills, remaining composed, it sort of it will also sort of play a role here. And in terms of sources of accurate information, in terms of the election process, the best and most trusted sources of election information is going to be information from election officials in most cases. So it helps to know who your state's chief election official is, or the state's election office, going to your state or local election office website, or calling your local election office is generally the best way to find out if you're registered to vote and to figure out key election dates and deadlines. USA.gov, the US Vote Foundation, the National Association of Secretaries of State are also good resources for voters across the country. And then, in terms of other kinds of misinformation, when you see information that seems off or particularly emotionally charged in some way, you can also try to get better context from established news outlets or trusted community organizations.
Josue, you lead NALEO's Defend the Truth campaign. What does NALEO prioritize when you're pointing voters to reliable information?
Yeah, we prioritize, I guess, in a nutshell, that all voters be able to obtain or receive timely and accurate information about the voting process. We are a civic engagement org. I'm part of the civic engagement department. So from the community standpoint, it is, no matter what you vote for, who you vote for, everyone who's able to vote can cast the ballot. I think it is a bit difficult from the community standpoint, though. I think it is a bit difficult living in such a polarized world, and the amplification of misinformation and disinformation to really hone in on who is a trusted messenger and be able to leverage that based on the work that we've done with the community. I think it's a bit difficult when misinformation and disinformation is everywhere, and of course it impacts the loss of trust in institutions. However, I will agree with what was said about trusting your elected and appointed officials. They are the ones providing the accurate information about elections and about how to participate in elections. I'd even go a step further to say that other civic engagement, nonpartisan organizations that are working and engaging with voters with voter education, voter registration, etc. They are also kind of funneling that information as well. So NALEO Educational Fund has our voter-friendly hotline. We're part of our a national election protection coalition that also has a hotline for voters to call should they encounter any issues at the polls or if they have questions about the voting procedures. So these groups are also, serving as a trusted messenger from multiple levels, right? I would also say that any platform that is paving the way to serve as a trusted messenger for the community members should also be seen as a trusted messenger. One example I'd like to give is a radio station in Arizona called Radio Campesina, which was started by Cesar Chavez in, I think it was the 80s, but they provide timely and accurate information about the voting procedure. They have done community work, community engagement events where they even register voters. I mean, it's efforts like that really just leverage the voter education. And I think those are the movements that we should be able to, or that we should highlight and leverage and perhaps even partner with, right? Bringing voter information to voters so that they know how to cast a ballot. And in terms of NALEO Educational Fund, since we do work with within the naturalization process, newly naturalized citizens, let's get them registered to vote. So there's multiple avenues that we work, but ultimately it's just providing the accurate and timely information to voters.
Right. Yeah, and I'm really excited in my new role to collaborate with colleagues here at Teams, NYC Votes campaign, and in support of this committee, execution of this committee's work to really ramp up in the coming years our voter education. And we work in really close partnership with the Board of Elections, which is another really reliable source of information here in New York City. So I want to note that as well. I have one more question, and then we are going to turn to our committee members for any questions they might have for you. So my last question is, how can individuals, communities, or organizations organize to protect against or respond to misinformation efforts? Any examples you've seen to combat these efforts in real time? Some of you have mentioned some of these examples already, but anything you haven't yet had a chance to say yet? Maybe we'll start with Jennifer on this last question.
Any other opportunities or resources to combat misinformation? That was the
Yeah, and any strategies you've seen, any examples that have seemed really effective to you that jumped out at you as effective.
Sorry if you hear my daughter. She's like, time's up, lady.
Love it.
I think it's having some of these, it's having like a roundtable discussion like this. It's really important to just hear from folks that are kind of doing this work, but in different areas. What are some of the things that they're hearing? I am not privy to every single thing that happens at the federal government. So having experts here to educate me as a local legislator is really helpful. I really love the angle of today's roundtable, or the space created to really highlight the impact of AI technology and misinformation and communities of color. I feel like that likely deserves its own separate roundtable discussion. But I think really focusing, knowing and acknowledging that this is a community that is being disproportionately impacted, and really cultivating policies and legislation that's going to counter that, I think will be really important. And I'm really excited and looking forward to working with a lot of you here to figure out what that looks like. But yeah, we all have a responsibility to be accountable to the information that we're spreading in our communities, but that also our communities are hearing and experiencing. So I wouldn't add anything else besides like more of these discussions to cultivate policy that is going to do something and do it now.
Josue, I know I gave you the opportunity, you took the opportunity in response to the last question to talk a little bit about NALEO civic engagement work. Anything you want to add to that specifically about strategies communities or individuals or orgs like NALEO and allies can use to protect against or respond to misinfo efforts in real time?
Yeah, I think I know I said quite a lot. So I'll echo everything I said in terms of engaging and participating. I would also say, partnering with these nonprofit organizations that are doing the work on the ground. Partner with them for presentations, trainings. If you have some sort of volunteer effort going on, leverage those. I think this will be a very crucial and important year when it comes to the dissemination of information with regards to elections. We want to ensure that everyone knows the process and isn't affected by misinformation and disinformation. But as the field evolves and we're trickling behind it. I would also, echo working with elected and appointed officials at the state and federal level. Essentially, you are the trusted messengers. So working with these civic engagement organizations that are actively on the ground, so you hear firsthand what they're saying, but then also be able to amplify their tools, resources, etc. I think that's what I would say, and because it is a interesting year coming up this election, just remembering to breathe. I would say just remember to breathe, and also don't be afraid to collaborate and work together. We're all in this together, right? So we all bring a lot of skills to the table, so collaborating, researching, etc.
Michaela, any examples of really effective real-time organization or community responses to misinfo or disinfo you want to lift up?
Well, one thing I wanted to mention is that in the lead up to the midterm elections, we did tracking of election misinformation on narratives on social media, and we had a team of analysts that read through thousands of social media posts, and they also conducted an automated analysis of tens of thousands of posts. And one thing we found is that a large share of the false election information that we identified reflected themes that were the same or similar to the 2020 election, which included core conspiracies about voting machines, mail voting, and drop boxes, baseless claims of widespread votes cast by non-citizens, and so on. And each of these themes are misinformation themes that have occurred in prior elections as well. So Even though it's troubling that these core misinformation themes repeat across election cycles, and we can be fairly confident that they will reemerge in this election cycle, it also, gives us an opportunity to be able to pre-bunk some of those core false narratives and give voters the information that they need in order to kind of rebut that ahead of time. And that includes information about existing election security safeguards. We have done polling that shows that voters across the political spectrum, their trust increases in the election process when given information about existing election security safeguards. So, I think doing that pre-bunking work and giving voters that information, which can come from election officials, it can come from community groups and from other organizations as well.
Thanks, Mark. Any effective efforts to combat
Well, I'll just say two
disinfo?
things. One, we desperately need to revitalize local and community media, including in languages other than English, which can be the kind of eyes that we need to check bad behavior in local politics. We're losing precious media outlets every day. Actually, New York is probably not as bad off as many other parts of the country, but even here. Secondly, I guess I'll make the point more pointedly than Josue met. Leaders in government in New York are just barely beginning to pay attention to all of this. There are a few amazing people like Jen Gutierrez. I can count them on one hand. And we need the public now to push. AI as a topic in general has just not really penetrated the political culture yet. And certainly the specific question of what all this new technology means to elections and the potential to spread misinformation and to undermine trust in democracy. We're barely grappling with that. So regular people need to make some noise and reach out to your representatives and say, hey, you got to deal with this. We got an election in a fairly significant municipal election in 2025 in New York when we're all up. And we don't have a lot of time to get these systems in place. So I hope that New Yorkers start to speak out.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to take the opportunity right now to invite into the conversation. We're going to shift to our committee members for some questions, but I want to invite Faraine Griffith into the conversation as well. She's a representative from the Public Advocate's Office. Thanks for joining us, Faraine. And we have some time set aside now for you and Chris and Danielle to pose any questions you want to our panelists. And do you have any questions, Faraine? I'll start with you.
I don't have any questions. If I may share comment. I echo what everyone is saying. I may share a few things instead of asking a question. Is that okay?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
As Paul said, thank you for having and convening this. This was good. It just takes me back. I just wanted to say it takes me back to the census 2020 and the misinformation and how we had to organize on the ground with our faith-based communities, our ethnic media, our CBOs to get the word out so that those communities knew exactly who to trust. They already had the relationship with the trusted communities, the media, the faith-based communities, CBOs, and that's what we encourage New Yorkers to lean to. That was before I got to this. Before I got to the Public Advocate's hat, but the Public Advocate's Office was a partner of ours. So I think, and also leaning into websites, civic engagement websites like Turbo Voter. Locally, we have Educated Voter, who has partnered with us and CFB numerous times. Nicole Yearwood. If we just look into those spaces, I think we can further reach more people to get the information out on the ground level going up instead of from the top level going down. Input. And I thank you all. And I echo everything that they said. I just wanted to add those pieces.
Thank you. Danielle, Chris, any questions for our speakers?
I'll go first, Danielle, if you don't mind. I do have a question, but I'm going to make a plug and a challenge, and then the question comes out of those two things, Paul. For me, look, I've had one foot in higher ed for 30 years, close to 30 years, and one foot in public service and government and politics. So that makes me hopelessly optimistic and hopelessly naive all at the same time about change and the things we can do collectively. In the classroom, since I've been teaching this stuff, you know, you don't advocate, but you talk about civic literacy, civic education, civic engagement, collaboration, voter education, the things that all the panelists have been talking about. And what we try to do in education is embed that in curriculum. Without advocating, you're trying to get to facts and the truth. And so I think there's a way, and maybe this is where the plug and the challenge come in. Hoshui's been very humble about this, but he came out to Farmingdale in November. Farmingdale is a SUNY campus. We're on Long Island. I live in Queens, so I'm a New Yorker. And what he did and what Naleo did is they ran our students through their training. The students brought their laptops, they brought their devices, and it was a hands-on training on how to detect misinformation, malinformation, disinformation. And he's coming back on Super Tuesday, and we're going to do this all day. And what we're trying to do here at Farmingdale is to embed this somehow in the curriculum. All students have to do an applied learning requirement, so we're trying to count this for applied learning. We're thinking already, and we've talked to Hoshui and Naleo about this, about a micro-credential, which is in college is a skills-based certification. So how do you embed this in the educational platforms? And for our elected officials, can we do this in high schools in New York City? Is there a way to somehow bring back civic engagement and civic education and civics, as we used to call it? And so not only about the laws to prevent this, but to really, as Hoshui said, arm voters with education about what might be the truth. So I guess that's where the challenge and the question is there a way that we take these wonderful institutions, elected officials, CFB, VAAC, nonprofits, and start to build this thing as the borough president was saying, that we have to work together to do this. And I think at the college level, we might have a model for this. I'm not saying that it's, revolutionary, but it's a start. And then how do we sort of build down into, K through 12, et cetera. So that's a lot, but I think that that's a very hopeful thing for me. And maybe I'm naively hopeful, but I'm going to rest there with it.
Who wants to respond?
Thank you, Christopher. So I'm sorry, and my daughter's still screaming, but I think I got a lot of what you asked, which is like, when can we, or how can we really integrate the act of like civics earlier on and more consistently, right? Yeah, I think that's such a really good, that's such a good question. I think since, I've been a council member for 2 years, I was a staff member for a lot longer, and was born and raised here, went to public schools here. And I think the conversation around civics for me that resonated was when my dad became an American citizen and I was in the 2nd grade. And when I was in high school, and they wanted to make sure that people that were 18 were like registering to vote. That's it. And so I think you're right. I think there does need to be more of an investment and a model of the importance of civics. And civics could look very different. It has to look different because New York is so diverse. For civics is not necessarily, doesn't have to be voting in an election, because if you are not eligible, then that doesn't apply to you. But civics is also about engagement. Civics is also about the collective, about community responsibility. What you've seen and is more likely schools in my district, for example, that are taking matters into their own hands and creating curriculum around civics and the responsibility. But I think we have to do a lot more. And I'm sure the borough president can attest to this, but like oftentimes when we're invited to schools, the onus is on us to really explain civics engagement for those 20 minutes that we're there. And so there does need to be a deeper dive and a more consistent investment into civics. I know in the last term, Councilmember Rosenthal at the time had worked on student voter registration day, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a thing. I don't know where it's at today, but I think some of these initiatives really need to be fully funded and instituted, and really like drive the message home that civics is community. Civics is not for a particular person of a particular background, that there are many ways in which communities can become involved. And so I think that's a really good point, and we need to do a lot more.
Can I just add one thing? I certainly agree with Jen and the other panelists on the need to ramp up on civics education. We also need media literacy training for all kids right now. The stakes are so high. We have to teach people how to assess the veracity of content and how to understand tendencies for bias in some of these new tools. And so here's where I have to say how much I disagree with the DOE's current policy of blocking, of not only not training people how to recognize problems in content from ChatGPT or to use it in productive ways, but actually 2/3 of public schools in New York City still block access to GPT. So how are we teaching people to understand what those tools do well and how they can help you in your studies and your career, and ways in which those tools fail in profoundly alarming ways? We're going to have to teach kids now to be their own best judges. And that's going to take deliberate effort in the curriculum of New York City public schools.
Thanks, Mark. Michaela or Josue, either if you have any thoughts to share in response to Chris's question.
I echo everything that Mark and Jennifer have said. I think it is important. I think students are in such a unique position to be doing work, civic engagement work. We at NALEO, we have done some work with Latino Greek life organizations to bring this type of information to them as well. And also some of them require, community service requirements to do volunteer hours. We want to plug them into some of our work. And some of them are just turning 18 this year, so they'll be voting for the first time. So I think it's important for them to also be to know what the voting procedure is like. I think someone said this earlier, but I mean, civic engagement, it's about everybody. It's not just about a particular, group. It's about everybody, right? So just wanted to leverage that.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add that, as has been indicated, new voters are among the groups that are most likely to have certain information gaps in terms of the voting process. And so, we'd love to see more education and instruction on how to seek out accurate information about the voting process.
Thanks, Michaela. Danielle, do you have any questions for any of our panelists?
Well, I have two comments, I think, or maybe three. One is that the CFB does these fabulous publications right around Election Day. So New York Votes would be a great opportunity because it arrives in paper in your mailbox. And it would be a great opportunity to provide a listing of, hungry for accurate information, go here, and then maybe have some of that in there. That would be a really good way to reach the voters in New York City. But I think that all of you have identified a huge problem here, which is a complete absence, an almost complete absence of teaching civics, teaching social studies, teaching how to be a good citizen. And we've often talked on this call about having a trusted messenger. And I think that the CFB and the Board of Elections, and certainly some of the major papers, you need several trusted messengers, and to rely on X or anything else for your information is a fallacy to start with. I mean, this is the sound biting of America. And it's super unfortunate as someone who, I mean, let's not forget that iPhones just came in 2007. So the ways that we got information before that are still out there. There are fewer of them, but there are ways, and there must be ways to provide, certainly at all levels of education, the funding that's necessary to end up with an educated electorate and an educated citizenry, and a citizenry that wants to participate, as opposed to one that says, oh, politics, I don't get involved in politics. Because that's what we've been told since 1980, that government is the problem, not the solution. And now we're seeing all of that on these platforms. But the last thing I wanted to say was that the New York Times Book Review just 3 days ago now, on Sunday, had a great spread about books about AI. And one of the ones that was recommended highly is one by Ro Khanna, and the reviewer, the congressperson from California, the way that the reviewer ended with it, which is that at least there was one person in Congress who understood AI. And so it was a 2-page spread with a whole bunch of books in it that seemed to be quite apropos of this discussion. And then I just want to thank the panel and thank Paul for his great questions, because as usual, the CFB has knocked it out of the park.
Thanks, Danielle.
The VAAC has knocked it out of the park.
Chris, did you have any second questions, or are we good? You want to move on to want to invite our speakers to give brief closing remarks if our committee members are good. Cool.
I echo what Danielle said, knocked it out of the park. It's been great, really great. Thank you.
Great. Well, I want to invite our speakers now to give any closing remarks you might have. And why don't we start with Borough President Levine?
Well, thank you, CFB. Thank you, VAAC. Thanks to my great fellow panelists. This has been a very important conversation. We need to be talking about this now. We need to formulate a plan of action in the face of what is a very serious threat. But I feel better knowing that the folks in charge of our campaign finance system are thinking and listening and beginning to grapple with this. Thank you again for convening this conversation and for including me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you for inviting me into this space. It's been truly informative, and I look forward to obviously working with the CFB, but working with all of my fellow panelists here on some really cool and innovative policies on the exact topic we've been discussing this evening. So thank you all again.
Thank you. Michaela, any closing thoughts?
Thanks so much for having me. I learned a lot from the other panelists on here today, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
And Josue, bring us home.
Last but not least, thank you so much, everyone, CFB and the VAAC for having me, for inviting me to speak. I love doing participating in conversations like this, and I look forward to participating and listening more on conversations because this is a important topic. This is an important year, and we want to make sure that we're all working together, right? And Chris, I will see you in a few weeks in Farmingdale. So thank you again.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure attending my first Voter Assistance Advisory Committee meeting and moderating and facilitating this conversation. I think we're going to move now to any closing remarks that our committee members may have before my colleague Amanda closes us out.
We said it all.
All right.
Turn it over to Amanda.
Well, I want to extend a huge thank you to everyone tonight. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us and lending your expertise. Thank you to our VAAC members for your questions and your many thoughts that will guide us. And especially thank you to Paul for moderating your very first VAAC meeting and being so willing to jump in and do that. This has certainly given us a lot to consider as we move forward in voter education in 2024, when a lot of eyes will be on us and on the Board of Elections, and when we will be working in a space where we are going to be combating a high amount of misinformation and disinformation. So thank you for partnering with us on this effort. I hope everyone has a great evening, because this concludes our February 2024 meeting of the Voter Assistance Advisory Committee. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Amanda.